Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 108, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of personal sewing to talk about this week. It is January, and when you own a business, that means doing the end of the year paperwork and getting all of the tax stuff ready for the accountant to go over. So that's what I've been spending my week doing. And I found that when my brain is engrossed in those kinds of tasks, that the creative part of my brain tends to take a nap, and it's very hard for me to switch back and forth. So I've spent a lot of time cleaning the house, and I'm tracing patterns and doing those kinds of things rather than actually making things right now. So I have learned that in these periods when I can't be switching back and forth easily, it's better if I don't force things. Forcing things means that I would go to my sewing room and start 15 projects. And I don't want to do that. I want to be deliberate about what I'm spending my time on. I have a few class samples that need to get made in the next couple of weeks, so those are going to be first up in the queue. It's not good or bad, it just is. I wear a lot of different hats in my life, and sometimes I have responsibilities that take priority over other activities. I am working on getting ready for my Sew Expo classes. Ticket sales are live. You can go to sewexpo.com. If any of my listeners in the Seattle area or any listeners at all who are planning to attend Sew Expo, give me a shout and maybe we can arrange a meetup time. It would be fun to get to see some of you face to face. I'll be teaching my thread class from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. on Thursday the 26th, my interfacing class from 11 to 1:30 on that same day. I'm teaching a serger class on using the cording foot from 11:30 to 1 on Friday the 27th, and I'm teaching my knitting class on Saturday the 28th from 8 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., and that's a class on cabling. Only 4 classes this year, not 6 like last year, but I think that's going to be a good thing. Also, if I have any listeners in Seattle or elsewhere who would be interested in taking a class from Kenneth King at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma, he suggested that I get a group of people together and then approach Rylas about scheduling something, because it's a lot of pressure and work for her to bring someone like him in from across the country without knowing if a class is going to sell out. So if I can get people to commit beforehand, that will go a long way toward getting him on this side of the country to teach a class. I would love to do his raglan coat class, but honestly, anything he teaches will be worth taking. Today's episode is going to be a listener question episode. I've gotten a couple of questions in the past month or two that aren't really enough to devote an entire episode to, but I do want to address them, and this seems to be a good way to do it. So, several people have asked about sources for sewing supplies now that Joanns is out of business, and I think maybe we're all having a little bit of continuing or delayed grief. Joanns has been out of business for over half a year now, and I've run into a lot of people in the last couple of weeks who just are lamenting the fact that they don't have a place to buy notions mostly, but also fabric. I can really only give you my perspective, and just remember that I live in rural northwest Montana, so I've always had a bit of trouble sourcing things. It just comes with the territory. In terms of shopping locally, I would suggest checking out your local fabric store if you have one, even if it's a quilt store. Our quilt store has done a great job of bringing in a number of different garment fabric substrates. So we have half a dozen bolts of rayons, we have half a dozen bolts of knits, we have other fabrics, and I'm really trying to be creative in my use of fabrics so that people who maybe haven't thought about sewing garments might come to the quilt store and see something like a quilted jacket that they could get to kind of help them dip their toes into the water. Our store owner even joked with me the other day that she's half tempted to change the name of her store because she wants to attract not only quilters, but other kinds of sewists. So even if you only have a quilt store in your town, go to them and see if they'd be willing to order some basic fabrics, basic garment fabrics, and you might find that there is a market for it. You can certainly help them out by offering to make store samples. We've found that store samples really help to sell fabric, not only for classes, but just in general. So anytime we get a new fabric into the store, I do try to make up a sample that they can put on display for a couple of weeks. When I was at Bernina University back in June, I went to a couple of classes that were aimed at quilt stores that want to start carrying garment fabric, and they were extremely well attended. So I think that fabric stores, quilt stores understand that there is demand for garment fabrics, and they're trying to figure out a way to fulfill that demand, but it's a pivot for them and it's going to take a few months. So do what you can to help out your local fabric store if you have one. If you don't have a local fabric store, you may be stuck with the big box stores like Michael's, Hobby Lobby, and Walmart. Our Michael's is a very, very small store. It has one aisle of sewing supplies, and it's not a very long aisle. It's probably maybe 15 feet long. They have 3 aisles of yarn, and thus far I have not seen any movement toward expanding either of those areas. The Michael's down in Missoula is much bigger. I'm hoping to get down there sometime in the next couple of weeks just to kind of scope it out. I've been to several Michael's stores in Seattle and Spokane, and they are expanding their offerings. I would say that right now they are a good place to get notions, but I don't see them as being a good place to get garment fabric yet. Hobby Lobby has been a big disappointment to me. And I don't want to get into the politics of Hobby Lobby. People shop there or they don't. It's a personal decision, and I'm not policing anybody else. Just from a product standpoint, this past year, they haven't carried very many new garment fabrics at all. They stopped carrying new look patterns, and now it appears that they're going to stop carrying McCall's patterns. Our store has been selling them for 50 cents a piece. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but it is what it is. They do seem to carry notions, although I talked to one of my friends last week who had made herself a pair of bib overalls, and this was part of the conversation we were having was about the fact that Joanns was out of business, and she said the only place she could find hardware for her bib overalls was at Michael's, at Hobby Lobby, and they didn't have the color that she wanted. So if anybody from Hobby Lobby is listening, not that I think corporate America cares about consumers much anymore, but if anybody from Hobby Lobby is listening, you are missing a golden opportunity to get more business, because there are a whole bunch of former Joann Fabrics customers who are looking for places to buy things, and they want to give you money and you can't take it. Walmart is a mixed bag. Some Walmarts have done away with their fabric and craft sections altogether. Most of the Walmarts that I travel to these days have eliminated their remnant racks. We still have a remnant rack at our store, but it's hardly ever stocked. The Walmart in Missoula tends to have a really well-stocked remnant rack, as do a couple of the stores in Spokane. Our Walmart has been out of interfacing for probably 3 or 4 months now. It was well back into the fall that I think they sold out. So maybe nobody's going to the craft department at our Walmart and looking to see what needs to be restocked and restocking it. Maybe it's just dying from lack of attention. Walmart does carry some simplicity patterns. They tend to be a little bit on the easier side. This whole pattern thing is driving me a little nuts, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if you have to order supplies, I can give you some of my favorite online sources. Certainly this is not a comprehensive list. I'll just give you the ones that I've had good luck with. In terms of general sewing supplies, Wawak, WAWAK.com, Wawak.com is my go-to. I order my industrial thread from them. They carry just about everything, and they are the closest to one-stop shopping that I can find. I think their prices are reasonable, but boy, where they really shine is in delivery. I have ordered things and had them within a couple of days. So if it's a time crunch for you and you need something and you have to order it, don't hesitate to go to them. If you need zippers, my 2 favorite zipper suppliers are Zip-It and Zipper Shipper, and I think they're both on Etsy. I have quite a supply of zippers because I never know when I'm going to need one and what length and what color. So for purse hardware or bag hardware, I typically go to either Clumhouse or Noodlehead. Both of those websites, and I'll put links to all of these, but both of those websites have a good selection in lots of different colors. SaleRite is another supplier that I frequent. In terms of where to shop online for fabric, that is the $64,000 question. Again, I can tell you where I shop for fabric online. Mood Fabrics, definitely. Cali Fabrics, Style Maker Fabrics, Nature's Fabrics, and knitfabric.com. I used to love to shop at Minerva, which is a UK company, but I really can't afford to do that anymore. So I'm trying to shop here in the United States, but those of you elsewhere in the world might want to check minerva.com out. They've got a huge assortment of fabrics. I have a friend that likes to shop at Discovery Fabrics, which is a Canadian company. So there are a lot of online fabric stores out there, and I think you just kind of have to ask around and see who's ordering from where. It depends on what kinds of fabrics you like to sew with. I tend to order a lot of knit fabric, and those are the places that I've had good success with. I've also gotten some questions on what indie pattern companies are good ones to start with if you've never sewn from an indie pattern before. And again, this is just my advice based on what I have learned over the last several years about indie patterns. There are some really good ones out there, and there are some not so good ones out there, just like everything. But if I were trying to evaluate an indie pattern company for the first time, I would do 2 things. I would go to their website, and I would see if they have a downloadable free pattern. And the primary one that I'm thinking of here is Sinclair Patterns, offers the Harper cardigan on their website as a free download. I have made probably a dozen Harper cardigans. It's a great pattern. It was a good way to get introduced to them. And when I was going through my stash of indie patterns the other day, I have a lot of Sinclair patterns. Part of the reason I have so many is because they come in a tall size. They are also very well graded and very well presented. So being able to sew up a free pattern from an indie pattern company is a good way to get a sense of what their pattern style is like. The other thing that I would do is when I go to the pattern company's website is to see if they say what model they're designing for. So are they designing for someone who's 5'5" and wears a B cup? Or are they designing for someone who's 5'7" and wears a D cup? There's a big difference in the kinds of patterns. There's a big difference in the grading and the presentation. My sense is that most pattern companies design for someone who's 5'5" and wears a B cup because that is the quote-unquote average size. I don't necessarily think that that's the quote-unquote average size of a female in the world today, but that is what the industry has deemed as average. I think Seamwork is the only one that I've run into that says on their website that they design for someone who is 5'7" tall. Most pattern companies these days are doing a much better job of expanding their size ranges. But again, this can be tricky. When I was designing knitwear, there's a point at which you have to change the block or the basis on which you're grading your patterns. And again, that was knitwear, but the same thing is true when you're designing for larger sizes. It's not as simple as taking something that's designed for someone who's 5'5" and wears a B cup and designing it for a much larger size simply by making it bigger all over. That's not how you grade a pattern. So if you fall into one of those larger size ranges, that's something to be aware of. You might want to start with a pattern company like Cashmerette, which designs for curvy and larger sized women. Some companies just do a better job of it than others. Love Notions is a very popular pattern company. I think they've got some fabulous designs. I tend not to use their patterns because they're drafted for somebody who's shorter than I am, and I have to do a lot of work to make them fit me. Sometimes I want to put in that work and sometimes I don't. I actually think I have a better track record with commercial patterns than I do with indie patterns. I've got a couple of Berta patterns that I go back to over and over again. So I don't know that I have a good answer to that question. Some of it is trial and error. Some of it is reading reviews. I use the sewingpatternreview.com website a lot, both for indie patterns and commercial patterns. You can get a free account and you can go there and put the pattern number in or the name of the pattern, and everyone who has reviewed it, those all pop up and you can go through them and see pictures. You can read the reviews. You can see where the trouble spots might be. And again, I'm not dinging designers here because it is virtually impossible to design something to fit every person's body. It's not doable. The trick is finding those pattern companies that have done enough of the work for you that getting from their pattern to something that fits you doesn't require a whole lot of altering and changing the pattern. Okay, the last question that I want to tackle came from a mother of young kids, and she wanted to know how I managed to juggle designing and working with little kids at home. And I've talked a little bit about this in previous podcasts. So when my husband and I moved to Montana in 1993, our older daughter was a year old, and I had been working in Baltimore as a technical support specialist for a software company. I interviewed for a similar job here. They offered it to me and said, "We're prepared to pay you $5 an hour." And granted, that was in 1993, but I said, that's not anywhere close to what I was making in Baltimore. And they said, "Well, this isn't the East Coast," which is true, but I still had to be able to justify having a job. And my husband said, "This is ridiculous. We're not putting our child in daycare to pay for daycare." But he said, "You're always knitting. Do you think you can find a way to make money from your knitting?" And you have to remember, this was back before the internet. So there were no websites, was no TikTok, there was no YouTube, there was no way to make money doing that kind of work. So I wrote a book and I started teaching. And then I started publishing a knitting newsletter, which I did for 10 years, 4 issues a year with articles and patterns. And to be honest, I look back at that time and I have no idea how I did it. By the time I really got going, my older daughter was 8 and in school. My younger one was 3. Our church had a daycare at the time, and I was able to have her go to the daycare if I happened to be traveling and teaching. We had a lot of friends here who were willing to pick up kids from school and keep them. My best friend Susan was actually in charge of the daycare at our church, and I have referred to her over the years as my children's other mother. Things eased up considerably when both of the girls were in school. I think it just took a lot of cooperation and communication between my husband and me and between all of our friends. I have always been an early riser, and I do a lot of my work right now between 4 and 6 a.m. And I didn't get up quite that early when I had little kids, but I did do a lot of work early in the morning. I am useless after about 6 p.m., so I didn't get a lot done then. That is a tough stage of life and of parenting, and I know that young parents don't like to hear this from old people, but my kids are adults, and as much as I love spending time with them as adults, there are a lot of times that I miss when they were little. And I think, where did it go? On the other hand, it's important not to lose yourself completely. I did teach both of my kids to knit, and we did a lot of crafts together in general. Maybe I'll ask my kids for their perspective on this, because I'm sure that they remember things differently than I do. Although my older daughter has said periodically that she appreciates the fact that I was home. Again, I did it, and I don't remember how I did it because I was living through it. So I'm really sorry I don't have a better formula or a better way to advise you. I can tell you that it does get easier as they get older. It's interesting to me that as my kids have become adults, they don't seem to have the same drive to create that I do, which is not bad. And I think they've also funneled it in different directions. So my older daughter has played around with Cricut and making cards and doing things like that. But I think her creative focus is really her house. She is really good about making it a home and providing hospitality in a way that I have never been able to do. At my house, you're lucky if you get a paper towel for a napkin. And she sets a beautiful table. My younger daughter has dabbled in cross-stitch. Her big thing is fashion, though, and I think that that's where a lot of her creative energy goes. All of that is to say that I don't really have a formula for being creative when you're trying to juggle raising little kids with other responsibilities. I think that You just have to be creative about how you structure your life and take advantage of all the help you can get. I wish I had a formula for you and I could say, do this and this will happen. But I think the best thing is to be creative about how you set up your schedule and take advantage of all the help you can possibly get. I'm going to throw a bonus question in. This isn't really a listener question, but I get asked this all the time in my classes, and that is, how much fabric should I buy? The flippant answer, of course, is all of it, but this applies more to what happens if you see a beautiful fabric and you want to buy it, but you don't have a specific use for it. So it depends. If you're looking for a quilt back, I would get 5 yards. That will give you a backing that will be roughly 90 by 90, maybe a little bit smaller depending on if you try to piece and match the print. And that's generous for most size quilts. Anything bigger than about a queen size, I usually end up buying a wide back anyway. If we're talking apparel fabric, then it's a little bit different. Some of it depends on the size that you're making. Some of it depends on the width of the fabric. Some of it depends on what it is you want to make. The good thing is that a lot of apparel fabric is 54 inches wide. I typically buy between 2 and 3 yards. And again, it depends. Some patterns, like the toaster sweater, requires 3 yards of fabric. And so does the J. Lee Natalie top. But I could get a basic t-shirt, a short sleeve t-shirt, out of a yard of knit fabric. So if you see a fabric you absolutely can't live without, I would say err on the side of buying a little bit more. I bought some beautiful boiled wool at the Mill End store in Portland, Oregon. And unfortunately, I only got about 90 inches worth of a 54-inch wide fabric, and that isn't quite enough to make a coat for myself unless it's a short coat. So I haven't quite decided what I want to do with that fabric yet. I keep taking it out and looking at it, and every pattern that I've tried to use it with, I don't quite have enough. So, as I say, err on the side of a little bit too much. I think that'll do it for this episode. I hope that some of this information has been helpful to you. As always, I appreciate the feedback. I appreciate the ratings and reviews that I've been getting on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you want to send feedback, the best way to do it is to email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can use the fan mail feature, or you can leave a comment on the show notes page. And the podcast website is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. If you forget any of that, you can always get to it from my website, which is www.janetzabo.com. And that has links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and my blog. My blog is where I post pictures and commentary about what I've been sewing and about life here in Montana. So if you want to follow me there, please do. So until the next episode, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.